My name is Carla Quinnett. I'm part of the Learning Network. Positively Rural is an established quarterly webinar, and these webinars are planned and organised by a team of people who are passionate about mission and ministry within the rural context. I'm so glad that I'm part of this team. During our Positively Rural gatherings, we reflect on how we might best minister and engage in mission within the rural context. We share good news stories from the rural context and consider together ideas for mission and ministry. It is, of course, as I said, wonderful to welcome everyone today, but it's especially good to welcome those who will be helping us to explore the theme of spirituality of older people. We're really glad to have a team of people from the Anna Chaplaincy who'll help us to explore our theme this evening. So really glad to welcome Julia, Paul and Wendy. Each bring with them a wealth of experience and will be introduced later in more fully. Before we launch into our webinar, let me share with you some housekeeping that will hopefully help our webinar run really smoothly. We kindly ask that you listen and share respectfully. I hope that we each seek to listen to understand before we seek to share our own opinions. As you notice, we're recording the session. Please contact the event administrator, Katrin, in the Sheffield District Office if you need to discuss this. Also, if you prefer that your image is not recorded, please turn your camera off. And also, if you need to change your name for any reason to keep yourself safe or whatever reason it is, then please do so. We're hoping that we'll have no technical issues, but if we do, please be patient with us. If you accidentally get thrown out of the meeting for some unbeknown reason, then just use a link that you did in the first place to join the meeting. During the plenary sessions, we'd be most grateful if you keep your sound muted as much as possible, as this will help us to better hear the contribution. If you need to speak to either the host or the whole conference, then please use the chat function and you can click on the button on the bottom ribbon of the screen. We will be using the breakout rooms during the webinar. These will be explained as we go through. The rooms won't have a specific facilitator allocated, so please do be mindful about allowing anyone who wishes to contribute. And of course, we kindly request that you continue in those rooms to contribute and to listen with respect. Following today's gathering, we do encourage you to share good practice and learning from the webinar, but please don't share other people's stories. That's their short story to share, unless you've got permission, of course. And finally, please only share in this webinar what you feel comfortable in doing so, and is of course yours to share. There will be a Q&A opportunity within this webinar. If you have any questions, we encourage you to pop them into the chat and then the facilitators will have sight of those. And finally, it's my real pleasure to invite Andrew now, who will introduce our speakers fully and lead us in our opening prayer. Welcome, one and all.
Hey, thank you very much. Yeah, good to be here. I'm Andrew, part of the team that facilitates these events. So let's, as we begin, turn to God in prayer. Loving God, we thank you for Abraham and Sarah, Simeon and Anna, older people who had a special place in your plan. We thank you for older people who continue to be active within our churches and communities and contribute richly to society. We pray for older people for whom life is challenging, those who feel isolated or lonely, those facing health issues or financial uncertainty. May we be guided and inspired this evening about how best we can be the inclusive communities you call us to be, where people of all ages are valued, appreciated, and cared for. Bless our time together this evening. Amen. As Carla has said, we're delighted to have some speakers sharing with us from the Anna Chaplaincy network. And first of all, I'm going to hand over to Julia Burton-Jones, who has both a local and a national role within the organisation. And she will then introduce a couple of other people who are going to be playing a part as well. Thank you, Julia. Great to have you with us. Hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you for the welcome. It's a really interesting topic for us to explore as Anna Chaplains, and good to see so many Anna Chaplains joining us this evening. Welcome, everyone. I am in Kent. I'm joining you from Kent. I have a role supporting Anna Chaplains in 2 Church of England dioceses, Rochester and Canterbury, but also the other denominations in Kent. And we have some pretty rural parts of Kent. I will allude to some of those rural experiences later. But I also have a national role with Anna Chaplaincy as the training and development lead. So I work part-time for BRF Ministries. So training new Anna Chaplains and hoping to provide ongoing ministerial education to help people to really grow in their roles. We have really really enthusiastic learners in Anna Chaplaincy, hence so many of them this evening. So I've been invited to say something about Anna Chaplaincy first as a model of ministry and spiritual care for older people. So I'll first of all describe Anna Chaplaincy, then I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the research that I've done on rural ageing, what it's like to grow older in a rural community. And 1 or 2 thoughts from Kent, but then I'm going to have a conversation with Paul and Wendy, who are Anna Chaplains, and there are degrees of ruralness, I think you'll all agree. And I grew up in the Yorkshire Dales, where Andrew is talking to you from, a pretty rural part of the country, but I think Wendy and Paul's rurality, if there's such a word, is really quite significant. So I think we need to think of that also, degrees of rural community and what that might mean. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, and hopefully it will appear in a second. And just to say, Anna Chaplaincy is part of BRF Ministries, as is Messy Church, Parenting for Faith, and our books and resources for churches, which is called Living Faith. That's our 4th ministry area. People don't always realise we're all part of the same organisation, BRF Ministries. So let me just tell you something about the history of Anna Chaplaincy. Bear with me, you who are Anna Chaplains who already know this, but just to say that it was first developed in Alton in Hampshire by Debbie Thrower, who you may know was a broadcaster, but was also a licensed lay minister in the Church of England. So she began working on a small canvas in Alton, but attracted a lot of attention. It was really about responding in that place to the demographics of an ageing population. It was the Methodist and the Anglican Church in Alton that came together under a covenant, and one of their priorities was to address issues around ageing and to appoint a chaplain for older people, which was Debbie. And so as interest grew, and Debbie felt that perhaps this was a model of ministry that could be replicated, BRF Ministries took on Anna Chaplaincy and gave it a national home and a website and helped us to scale up. That's under 10 years ago, so it's quite a new initiative. And it's very much an ecumenical movement. We have all the major denominations represented in the network, and we often work ecumenically through churches together. You'll be hearing from Wendy, who is in Cumbria, where it's Churches Together in Cumbria that is the home of Anna Chaplaincy. And that number's gone up. Every time I show this slide, I think, oh, it's out of date again. We now have 338 Anna Chaplains and those in equivalent roles. And on Candlemas later this month, beginning of February, when we celebrate the prophet Anna, after whom we are named, a lot of other people are going to be commissioned, because it's a good time of year to commission Anna Chaplains. So we'll be up to 350 very soon. And what we're seeking to do is really raise the standards of spiritual care for older people. In many senses, what we're doing is not new and groundbreaking. Churches have always been engaged in this ministry, which has a strong pastoral element to it. But we're trying to learn together. We're trying to bring people together from across the country to share best practice and to really develop in our professionalism, if you like. So what are we about? Well, an Anna Chaplain is community-based, not linked to one organisation like a hospital or a school, but based in the community, going wherever older people are, and they're doing it in the name of their local church. They're sent out by their church to show God's love and kindness to older people. And we offer all older people, so we want to see the faith of our congregations and older folk encouraged and nurtured in their discipleship, not forgotten about if they can no longer come to church. So we're looking after churchgoers, but we are for people of strong, little or no faith. So that's where we're reaching out into our communities to be alongside older people wherever they are in their lives, to be able to listen to their stories and help them make sense of what's happening to them. And Anna Chaplains comprise ordained and lay ministers. We've got one of each this evening. Some are paid, some are in paid posts if their churches have funded that. We've got one full-time paid Anna Chaplain in St Albans, and it's the Methodist churches there who had the vision to appoint and raise the funds to appoint an Anna Chaplain. But we have others in paid roles. But a lot of people are licensed lay ministers, local preachers, people who are in lay leadership roles in church in a voluntary capacity. And as well as looking after the older people in our communities, we're very much concerned for their families, their carers, and the workforce who work with older people. Because we're working with people who don't have a faith commitment, we're very person-centred. We don't make any assumptions about people's belief systems. We're non-judgmental. We start from where they are in their lives. Just as would other chaplains. It's the ethos of chaplaincy. We're a ministry of presence. And we really want this ministry to be celebrated and recognised. And for those who are in ministry roles with older people to be seen and heard and thanked for their role. And for their voice to be heard as a representative of older people, advocating, especially those voices that are seldom heard, such as people living with dementia, people who are stuck in their own homes because of disability. So we really want churches to recognise how much quiet, faithful, but effective work is going on by people in their congregations, maybe unseen, but very much having an impact. And Candlemas, as I say, that time of year where we think about Simeon and Anna, is a good time to pray for people engaged in this ministry and to affirm them and bless them. So what are some of the key tasks? Well, Anna Chaplains are very much accompanying the person, walking alongside them, sometimes having to listen to difficult stories and help people to negotiate some of the major bereavements and losses that can happen, what we call the choppy waters of life. But also really helping people to make sense of their stories. Listening is the key skill, absolutely central to what we're offering. But because people's lives have held difficulties and challenges, things that they regret, there's a lot of sensitivity needed. People often looking back at points of biographical pain in their lives. So what do we do? What are some of the things that people do? And obviously this varies from place to place, from Anna Chaplain to Anna Chaplain, depending on the gifts and skills of the individual, but also the needs of the community. and the congregation. And you can see that some of these things are more feasible in a rural community than others. So definitely visiting people at home, perhaps taking home communion to them. And I think that is quite key in rural communities. But the leading services in care homes may not be relevant if there are no care homes in the area, but you may be visiting people from the community who are in a care home, perhaps at quite some distance from where they used to live. We also are about running groups for older people and ensuring that they can meet one another and be self-help and support networks for one another. And we're looking at how we can be inclusive in worship. So sometimes that's about the services we have at church, but it's also about perhaps having services that are particularly geared towards older people and people living with dementia. So thinking about inclusion, and then really an ethos that we hold dear is that we work very much in partnership with other local organisations who also support older people. Partnership and collaboration is really key to our model of ministry. So that's kind of giving you an overview of Anna Chaplaincy, and all of what I've said is relevant to Anna Chaplaincy in rural contexts. I would say that we have probably a larger proportion of rural Anna Chaplains than urban. We do seem to, Anna Chaplaincy does seem to appeal to churches in rural areas, which is great. And hence this is a really relevant topic for us. So you might or you might not have come across the organisation Centre for Ageing Better. It's a relatively recently established organisation, but it has a regular email newsletter which I receive, quite useful to keep across some of the issues around ageing. It also has a brilliant positive image library where you can go if you want a lovely image, positive image about older people. They've got free images that you can download, which I use regularly. And they produced this report, a commentary on the challenges and opportunities for people ageing in rural and coastal places in 2021, ageing in rural place. So quite a lot of what I'm going to say in the next few slides is drawn from that review. But I also tap into one or two other pieces of research. So what is it about ageing in a rural community that's distinctive? Well, I'm sure you're aware that rural communities are ageing faster than urban populations, and that's mainly due to inward migration of older people who like to retire to the countryside and outward migration of younger people in search of jobs and maybe struggling to pay for housing in some situations. This is quite a stark statistic, isn't it? Between 2019 and 2030, it's predicted that over 65s will grow by 50% in rural areas, and with a very negligible growth in under 65s. So what we're seeing now in terms of an ageing population in rural areas will only become more pronounced over the next few years. Another point about ageing in a rural place is that it is predominantly white. The populations are predominantly white, as you can see from that statistic. So what is it then like if you are somebody in the 2.4% of the population in rural areas who is not white British? That's quite isolating, isn't it? And so there are real pockets of social isolation and poor health in certain groups, the research shows. There's an interesting piece of research by Age UK that looks at LGBTQ plus people, divorced people, those living alone, older men, minority ethnic communities. What is it like for those groups, minority groups? So just a few of the pluses. I mean, it's idyllic, isn't it? Living in the countryside often. The pace of life is quieter. there is such beauty around, very much an area of home ownership. In the countryside, life expectancy is higher. And I'm going to talk about social capital in a minute, but the social capital living in rural communities is strong, and neighbours and communities really look out for each other. And we saw that writ large during COVID. There's also much higher levels of trust and community in rural areas, and I'm sure you'll be able to relate to that, and slightly better well-being. So what are some of the disadvantages of living in a rural community? There tends to be a pattern of people being asset rich and cash poor in later life. They've got houses, but they perhaps haven't got the money to heat them and maintain them properly. There are pockets of great inequality in rural and coastal areas. There are parts of the rural community that are quite well off and comfortable, but there are some pockets of great inequality and deprivation, especially coastal deprivation. It's hard to heat older homes. They're less easy to adapt, and they're often off-grid. So there's lots of implications there. When you're older, you need heating. Your body is less able to retain heat. And as I said, pockets of social isolation. So whilst you have that great sense of community, often there are people who are very lonely. And if you're older, the geography can create some difficulties in accessing healthcare and transport issues in getting to appointments. Something very simple like the roads can be quite dangerous, can be quite a deterrent to older people to be out and about. Sometimes it's the distance to services, to the hospital, for instance. Sometimes it's a lack of services, but sometimes the research shows it's actually not knowing what services are available in rural areas. It's very difficult to recruit and retain care staff because there's a smaller pool of people to recruit from, and there's a lot of travelling needed. And so the economies of scale in running care businesses are quite difficult. It stands to reason, doesn't it, that if population is sparse, there's going to be more isolation potentially, but that's exacerbated in a lot of areas by second home ownership, which is and has been quite a controversial issue for the countryside. And we all know about the funding cuts, meaning a loss of bus routes. Well, for older people, that hits particularly hard because they may be forced to give up driving their own car, and really car ownership and private transport is essential in rural areas. So people are very much dependent on friends and neighbours to take them places. And then you've got the issues that affect the whole population in rural communities of poor digital and mobile coverage. But again, if you're quite restricted and stuck in your own home, if you can't connect digitally, that's a problem, isn't it? And then again, the topography, just the geography of rural areas, they're very hilly, there isn't any pavement. It's difficult for older people easily who have frailty to walk in their local community. So I just, in closing, before bringing in Anne and Wendy and Paul, want to introduce you to a newly commissioned Kent Anna Chaplain, Anne there, who is in a rural benefice, not a very rural benefice, but a rural benefice with 3 villages in Kent, not far from Ashford. And that's her vicar, Sue, and she was commissioned in Advent. And those are the churches, they're the 3 churches, and there's a windmill, a restored windmill. That gives you an idea of the rural nature. And the signs, the village signs, and it's all very picturesque, beautiful part of the country. And the social capital is quite astounding. And told me about this, and I did a bit of research afterwards. It has such a vibrant community life, a very active parish council, which indeed had surveyed all the residents in November. It has rural heritage, it has that restored windmill, and Woodchurch Village Life Museum, which sounds interesting, doesn't it? And of course, the church. It has the Rare Breed Centre nearby, which I'm sure is a tourist attraction. And it has the Woodchurch Hub, which is operated and managed entirely by volunteers in the Memorial Hall and provides community support to people. It has an over 60s pop-in, and it has a wealth of groups in the village with the WI, village football and cricket clubs, an array of exercise classes. The village players perform 3 productions a year in the Memorial Hall, and there's a Morris dancing troupe. And the Woodchurch Morris men, who wouldn't love to see them? And it has 2 pubs, so it's doing pretty well, isn't it, to have 2 pubs? So it's got such a wealth of vibrant community life. So what is missing for older people? Well, in the 21 census, it showed that there are 2,100 residents in Woodchurch. So it's a village, isn't it? A reasonably sized village. And that the profile is older than the England average. But what Anne hears is that it's people with dementia and their families amongst the older sections of the village communities that lack support. So what she's hoping to do is establish small groups in the village halls for friendship and help for people with dementia and their carers. And this really aligns with research showing a dearth of support in rural areas for people affected by dementia. And also, Incumbent Sue is very optimistic because they're already receiving a steady stream of social prescribing referrals, older people being prescribed by their GPs to the church coffee morning. And she feels that having Anne as an Anna Chaplain will increase the capacity to get people involved in community life. And they both hope and pray that in the next few weeks they'll be able to encourage a team of people to become Anna Friends and Anna Chaplains across the 3 churches in the benefice. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavour of a sort of reasonably rural community. But I want to bring in Paul and Wendy now, just to give you a flavour of what some of their ministry is like in I would say, a much more rural community. So we prepared the questions in advance. There are too many questions, there's too much to say, so we might not get through all of them, but we'll do our best and want to stick to time. So we'll some of them I might only ask one of you the question, and then just ask, is there anything quick you want to add? So alternate by starting with Paul with one question and Wendy with another. So, but first of all, can you tell us about the lovely places where you're based? So first of all, Paul, where are you joining us from? What part of the country?
North Devon, northwest Devon. We're right up against the Tamar, so Cornwall is that way. And yeah, we're about 40 miles away from Exeter, 33 miles away from Barnstaple. Very, very wide open, 40 square miles, about 3,000 people in the whole lot, 7 villages, 2 shops, both village shops. And that's about it, really. All the market towns are on the outside, and there's only 4 of them. So my patch is really scattered. The villages, on average, only have about 200 to 300 people in the maximum. So most of our congregation and most of our people are living either on farms, highly industrialized area, there's no tourism here, or they're living in small, groups of 3 or 4 houses.
You got a bit of coast?
No, Bude is that way, 6 miles, and that's the coast. And that's into Cornwall then.
Thank you, Paul. So, Wendy, tell us where you're joining us from and what it's like where you are.
Well, I live in a lovely tiny little village, a fellside village in the North Pennines called Croglin. And Croglin is just inside the ecumenical East of Eden Mission Community, where I work as an Anna Chaplain. And the area I work in is full of villages, small villages, large villages and hamlets, and it is very rural. There are 18 churches and chapels and 10 worshipping communities. Very few shops, but it's about, I don't know, 5 to 10 miles from Penrith, depending on which part people live in, which is where people go for their shopping and everything. Yes, it's a really very rural place where people are attracted to the Eden Valley to retire, a bit like a magnet, because of all the lovely hills and the walking, and there are also a lot of farming families as well living in the area.
And your mission community, Wendy, it's Methodist and Anglican, is that right?
It's Methodist and Anglican,
Working
yes,
together.
joined together, yes.
And you're in the deanery, a Church of England deanery, Paul. Do other churches work with you in that patch?
Well, I've got 7 churches. 3 of them are shared with Methodists. Although we're not formal LEPs, we could be, but it doesn't matter to us because we just share. Another one is going to be shared with the Baptists later this year. So that breaking down of denominational boundaries has been really, really positive. We share ministry. We really don't care here.
That's absolutely brilliant. So can you think of a typical older person, the profile of a typical older person that you work with in your chaplaincy role? So Wendy, start with you. Can you describe a typical scenario?
I would say a typical older person that I visit would be someone in their perhaps late 80s, early 90s, who are still living in a house, perhaps it's quite too big for them now, that they've lived in for many, many years, but are struggling to stay there, and struggling with the garden and the housework, and somebody that's probably just can't really get out anymore, having been very much part of the community and the church as well. We have 2 people who recently died, sadly, and one was a church organist for many years, and another was a church warden for many years. So it's people that can no longer mix, and they've lost that social context, and some of them are quite lonely, although the villages are very, very supportive at the same time.
Thank you, Wendy. Anything you want to add to that, Paul? Can you identify with that? Are there some distinctions?
Yeah, I mean, everyone I see is different, and that's obvious. But I'd agree largely that nearly everyone that I work with has a profound Christian belief, but has been separated by the church for some reason. So yeah, just the same, Wendy, absolutely.
So Paul, what is it that makes it difficult for people to stay connected and to be at risk of loneliness? What are the factors that perhaps in a rural community for an older person make loneliness more of a risk?
I think social isolation, alienation. There's a lot of infighting in communities. I'm not going to make this all lovey-dovey because it isn't. You know, there's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of breakdown in relationships. There are families that don't get on. A lot of suicide, particularly in the farming community. We see a lot of that. But geographical isolation is another big factor. So the fact that I've got 2 ladies at the minute, and I'll change their names, but they live in a place called Tatcott, which is 30 miles that way roughly, and right out on the border in a deep valley. They're both 90. One of them's they've been together since they got married, but they've been together living next door to each other since they were 3 years old. Both church, they're absolutely fabulous, both 90, both got medical issues. One of them's going to go in a home. She's delighted about that. She's absolutely over the moon. But the other one, called Wendy, is heartbroken, and she is really, really resentful and has broken the relationship because she feels she's been abandoned. That's absolutely classic. And there are different reasons for it, but breakdowns in family and social relationships, social isolation, social alienation are the big factors here.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Does that resonate, Wendy? Do you want to add anything?
Yes, I think quite a lot of older people have got family that live a long way away, who they keep in touch with, but just don't see very often. And also, you know, people that have been driving for years and years can't drive anymore, so they can't get out. And also there's so much mud and ice in the villages in the winter that it's very hard for people to actually get over the front door, you know. And and people that would like to have, say, something like an electric scooter, there's no pavements, and a busy road going through some of the villages, so people can get isolated in very sort of country ways, I think. Yeah.
So this is a question just for Wendy, because Wendy has a background in health visiting and also has been a live-in carer in rural communities. So you're quite attuned to some of the issues for people with long-term health conditions in rural communities. What do you say are some of the main challenges in managing health for older people in rural areas, Wendy?
I think very much the main challenge is appointments, that older people have a huge number of appointments, whether it's the optician or the chiropodist or the doctor, on their calendar, and they have to organise transport. So they're very sort of dependent on friends and family, and if they can't find anyone, they have to phone the sort of community transport people to take them there, and it's very tiring, and it's worrying. But perhaps the main challenge is that if they have to go sort of 17 miles to Carlisle to a hospital, or 50 miles to Whitehaven in West Cumbria, then very often they have to be ready really early in the morning, and the ambulance is coming to pick them up at, say, 8:30. So they've got to get themselves up and dressed and had breakfast and be ready. And the energy it takes to do that is huge. So, that's probably my biggest concern, and the biggest challenge that they come across, sort of apart from actually the things that they're suffering. It's having to sort of work around all the appointments and hospital visits and things.
Yes, it's really hard to imagine, isn't it? What that's like to have a hospital, for those of us who've got a hospital a few miles away, what it's like to have such and you were mentioning that, Paul, earlier, weren't you? How near is your nearest hospital, Paul?
33 miles away, it's Barnstable.
Yes.
I mean, it's just a really difficult concept for us to get our heads around. We've got a hospital on the doorstep. And I suppose a bit linked to that, both of you, is what it's like to be caring for an older family member. So particularly for those who live nearby, but then it must also be difficult if you live at a distance. But imagine working so supporting a carer, supporting an older person as a carer with dementia, either your parent or your partner. What's that like? It must be challenging.
Well, it's very, very difficult with not very much respite for carers. It's very, very difficult to get times in a care home to give people a rest. We're very lucky, actually, in our mission community, because there are people who are doing a lot of work with dementia, and we've got an admiral nurse who will support dementia sufferers and their families. So we are quite lucky there, and that's now sort of developing, really. So but yes, it is difficult, very difficult.
And carers feel isolated anyway, but I think even more so, would you say, Paul, in a rural community?
Absolutely. I mean, I was also thinking, just picking up on Wendy was saying about how difficult it is to care for somebody. It doesn't end there. So when the person with dementia or with a long-term medical condition is either put into a nursing home or a long-term facility, social care, or dies, more commonly, the person who's left, who's devoted their life, frequently daughters, are left absolutely devastated and lost.
Yes.
We see a huge amount of that. Isolation here is I mean, it is the most beautiful place on earth. It is wonderful. You can go out tonight and there's no artificial light. I can just see the whole heavens lit up there. It's wonderful. But the downside to that is that health visitors don't get out to us as regularly. We're only 3,000. We're scattered all over the place. You can only expect so much. And so community care, Anna care, is critical. It's absolutely critical. And a huge amount of my work, even I know Anna Chaplaincy, I love it, but even as the benefits rector, huge amount of my work is organising care within the community. And they do a fantastic job. They really do. People care here enormously. And it's often getting people who are not family to do that for the reasons that Wendy identified, as well as the breakup. People do argue. I mean, it's just facts of life.
One of the things about the what you've referred to, Paul, of this tremendous sense of community caring for one another is, and the social capital that we hear talked about in rural communities, that, you know, people know each other really well. They have been used to support, mutual support, lots of groups and activities, social activities thrive. But what's it like for people, older people, when they become frail and they're kind of then cut off from that sense of participating, attending church, attending other social things in the community, maybe even not being able to get to a friend's funeral? Do you see part of your role as being to keep people connected, so that the sense of loss, that those links being severed, is ameliorated a little bit? Would you say, Paul, are you sort of a connector?
Not in that sense, but I mean, it's a really good question. It's really good because it's pushing where I'm at the minute. There are new connections, not old connections. So the old establishments of pub, parish councils, schools, churches are losing traction really rapidly. One of my villages has got a house in it that's got a massive great Palestinian flag hanging out of it today. And I know that 2 houses up and on the other side, there's a Jewish family. That's incredibly common now. And we do see a lot more refugees and people of secular. I've got Muslims here, I've got Buddhists here, I've got Baptists here, I've got seculars here. The old structures that held everyone together are going, but the new structures are not necessarily any weaker. They're micro communities which are forming differently and around different subjects. So it might be the knitting group, or it might be, you know, big thing here is model railways, believe it or not, and model aeroplanes for the blokes. For the women are much more organised, new art groups forming. And you're getting people that you wouldn't traditionally think being part of those groups forming into it. So the art group, very close to where I am now, is made up of farming women. That's it. You know, some of them run farms, but they make the time to go and do that because they're finding in it a social relationship. Now, that's not church, and it's not obviously not a Christian group, but there are Christians in it. And so there are new communities forming here and around me. It's where people don't become part of that new community, or don't have connotations with 2 or 3 of those new communities, where you start to really feel things breaking down. Of course, once you get over 70 or 80, it's really, really hard to be in there, because a lot of the time you're housebound, or you've got mobility problems. And also, just pick on what you were saying, Wendy, is another really good point about transport, about community transport. Devon is £60 million in the red, and so we've just lost our funding for transport. You know, so again, that's another area we need to be working on.
I mean, Wendy, you spoke to me about being the person who visits after a close friend has died, and the person you're visiting hasn't been able to get to the funeral, and you're kind of bringing the news of the funeral and helping them to feel that somehow they've been part of that.
Yes, we see that as a big part of our role, Anna Chaplains and Anna Friends, really, because there's a huge amount of disappointment and grief if people can't go to the funeral of somebody that they've known incredibly well in the village over the years. So what we try to do is to try and sort of take the order of service to them, and maybe look at the hymns, look at who did the eulogy, and just to say how it went, really, and who went there. And we also bring communion to people if they want it as well at other times. But so yeah, we just try to keep people in touch with the people that they have been very much part of and can't be anymore. There's a lot of visiting of neighbours and help with you know, shopping and things, but there is still people that get very lonely as well.
A link to this, the sort of the other side of the coin, I think, which is a challenge for you, is that when you're working in these really close-knit communities, it's not like the anonymous suburbs, is it, where just people don't know their neighbour's business. And Wendy, you were saying to me, when you visit, obviously people want to know the news, don't they? So you've got some issues with confidentiality, haven't you, that perhaps wouldn't hit so hard in urban and suburban areas, but you've got to be careful how you share the news so that you're not seen to be gossiping.
Yeah. You have to be careful, obviously, but in the villages, most of the villages I visit, everybody knows who the Anna Chaplain is going to. Although I don't tell people who I visit, they know, so they will ask, and they'll, you know, sort of probe for information, which is fine. But so the only things I ever share are is what all the village already know. You know, so if Mr. So and so is in hospital or has broken a leg or something, things that everybody knows, that it's all right to sort of give a very sort of vague response to. But I think as well, the fact that you never share any private information means that that person knows that you won't share their information with somebody as well. So but confidentiality is a big thing. Obviously, I'm very aware of that.
Yes, and it goes back to your days as a nurse as well, Wendy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we are running out of time. I've got a couple of questions that we're going to be about. Some of I won't ask them, but we could come back to them during the plenary if we have time, which was about how do you stop being overwhelmed by need when, you know, you're the only person, the only living soul perhaps who someone will see over the course of the week. They're not even seeing people out their windows. It really is isolating. So a question I had about that, which we might come back to, how do you maintain boundaries? The other thing which really strikes me hearing about your patches, which again we haven't got time for, is, you know, how do you kind of rationalize the fact that you could be covering hundreds of miles, you know, making these big journeys? So we might come back to that, but just a final one or two sentences, if you will. What do you see as being distinctive about the spirituality of older people in rural communities as opposed to perhaps urban communities? Do you think there's anything distinctive? Just a thought from both of you. Paul, do you want to kick us off?
North Devon, spiritual roots grow deep. They go really, really deep, and not just because the families, a lot of them can trace themselves back 400 or 500 years. Their depth of faith is absolutely awesome. It's not sophisticated theology, and they don't belong to chapel or church anymore, but what they have is massively deep, and it's a real treasure.
Thank you, Paul. Wendy, what would you say about people in your area?
Spirituality in our area, I think inclusivity and friendships are very, very important, but also nature, you know, the hills and the gardens and the flowers, and people are very in tune, you know, most people with that. Just kind of maybe quickly just share with you, a very dear gentleman died just before Christmas. And he was very, very good at woodwork, and he did the most lovely polished sculptures in wood. But he also did a little wooden cross, which when we did communion, he would light a candle and have this little cross on the table. And when he was 90, he as a gift to himself, he had built a conservatory on his house so he could look straight up Cross Fell. It had fantastic views. And he said to me one day that his ambition was to take that cross up to the top of Cross Fell, and I thought that was such a spiritual experience to hear that, really, you know. So that was lovely.
Thank you, Wendy. That's a lovely note on which to end and have our break now. So hand over to.
We're going to now have an open kind of question and answer time with our three speakers. If you have a question that you'd really like to ask, if you're able to, if you pop it in the chat with a cue in front of it, that'd be really helpful. If you're not able to do that, either just say it out, unmute yourself and say it out loud if you can't do that. But what we're going to do is start with one or two of the questions that Julia still had earlier, which I think will be really helpful. So maybe, Julia, if you want to think about your well-being question, I think that would be a good place for us to start. But if others can be thinking about questions and holding on to those or putting them in the chat, that would be great.
Yeah, the question which I think is relevant for all of us, but which I'd put on my list of questions to ask Paul and Wendy is how you cope when your rural seniors don't have family living nearby. They live on their own, and you might be the only living soul that they see for days on end. How does that impact on you emotionally, and how do you maintain boundaries so that you're not overwhelmed. Wendy was telling me some lovely stories about how people have little tricks for keeping her in the home, Wendy, didn't you? Or just need to finish watching Catchphrase, or just wait until yeah. What do you do, Wendy? How do you cope with that?
Well, I try to make my visits about an hour, and for the last 5 minutes I offer a prayer with people who, you know, might want to pray with me. And but in that way people get used to that sort of time scale, really. But there are people I visit who would like me to stay 2.5 hours, and that's quite quite a long time. And but you know the needs there, and it's very difficult to pull yourself away, and when they're really enjoying talking to you. But you have to do it, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to visit as many people as you want to in the day. Yeah, it is very hard, because emotionally, you know, you have to say to yourself, I'm not a daughter, and I'm not a rescuer. You know, I'm an Anna Chaplain, and I'm there to listen and to support and encourage, really. And people just get used to the fact that they have that hour, and I think mostly they look forward to it every 2 weeks or every month or whenever you go. So as far as a sort of getting emotional involvement, if something goes wrong, say you visited somebody and they're lying on the floor, they've fallen, say, and it's an upsetting situation, then, you know, we have our team rector that we can talk to, or I can talk with the Anna friends, or them to me, and we can sort of debrief to each other if there's been a very difficult visit. And sometimes we will swap who visits as well for a little while, and sort of change the dynamics a bit to relieve that stress.
Oh, that's really helpful, Wendy. And also we've got several of the Cumbria Anna chaplains in this meeting, so you also have your team meetings, don't you, across the county, which is helpful, isn't it? So you have got a sense of a network of others who are
and we have a chaplaincy lead as well, who we can go to.
Yes, who's also here, Sam. Lovely to see you, Sam. And then Paul, did you want to say anything about the issue of the emotional impact and boundaries that you need to maintain?
You need to be very careful about the boundaries. It's and it's easy to get over complicated or overwhelmed by it, but finding a full stop, prayer, journaling. I really journal like crazy, but it's little things. I collect fountain pens, and I love them. I love them to bits, and I make sure that I have time with that every day with my dog. Time in the evening, speak to Sarah. Just different things which allow you to deposit the day, hold it in prayer, and then let it go. I mean, the very first lesson my training curate taught me donkeys years ago when I was ordained was, when you give it to God, you let it go. You know, he actually made me march back into church and do it all again, just to make sure that I'd learnt the lesson. And it's not that you don't stop caring. Of course you continue to care. Of course it propped up. Of course you pray. But it's about that ability to trust God and to leave it in his hands, and not feeling that we have to carry it everywhere.
I agree with that.
There's a couple of questions that come into the chat, so I'll just if I ask and one of you wants to respond, that would be great. So Anne is asking, with regard to safeguarding, do you keep a record of visits and what was discussed? How do you deal with record keeping and safeguarding? So
do you mind if I ask Paul to answer that, because this is your forte, Paul, isn't it? Paul has been a trainer of chaplains and has developed good practice in chaplaincy. So if it's okay, Wendy, I'll get Paul to answer that one, because he's our go-to person for best practice on recording.
Yeah, I'm a psychologist as well, so that helps in terms of practicalities. I do record my meetings, where I've gone up and when. I would only record in something that concerned me. I wouldn't keep records of everything. I'm not a counsellor, but I also don't give, and this is absolutely critical, I do not give confidentiality. I make it very, very clear when I'm working with people that I do not gossip ever, and things will not be taken out of the room unless there is a threat to themselves or other people, or legal implication. That's absolutely critical. And even as a priest, I will do that. I'm not going to breach that, you know, so people know from the off that there are things, if they say to me, that I will have to repair. And of course, you've got to do it. It's Children's Act, there's the Terrorism Act, there's all sorts of things that implicate that. And so, yeah, keeping a record, I think, is absolutely journaling. Of course, absolutely private. You must keep them secure. And journaling online is great for that because you can get secure packages. But I keep mine in a tiny little safe because I do like to write with my pens. But I do record, I journal everything. It's a release, it gets things out. You don't carry it with you. You can offer it up in prayer in a very physical way, but then you can close the thing, put it away. You're safe, they're safe, and the community's safe.
Okay, I think Anne, you asked the question. Did you want to just say something else about it?
Yeah, I did. The reason I asked the question is because I know within Methodism, there have been issues with regards to safeguarding where the family of the person visited have got angry with the visitor, potentially where money has been given for the visitor to go and do some shopping and come back and given it back, and then the person being visited has said to the family, oh well, I gave them £20 but I didn't get any change. That's the kind of safeguarding issue I'm thinking of within this kind of environment. How do you safeguard yourself against things when family get involved was what I was thinking about.
I would never.
We're going to have a really brief response because then we've got some other questions. But
oh, sorry.
No, you're fine, Alice. I'm also Methodist and I know exactly what you're talking about.
I wouldn't put myself in that situation initially. I would not take money from somebody. If there was that situation, then there are ways you can manage it with the family or with other agencies. And I would always refer in that case, I would not take money, as I would not take a confidence that was embarrassing or potentially embarrassing to myself or to my church or to my community. I mean, you have to have these boundaries. You have to be very, very.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And sometimes within our own denominations, we have particular guidelines, because I think Methodist-wise, we have some guidelines about recording visits and where we went and what was said and that sort of thing. So we deal with that. Another question has come from Alison. How do you get to be an Anna Chaplain? And maybe we could also include, because there are both Anna Chaplains and Anna Friends in that answer to that question, maybe we could respond to that in one question, if that's okay. So if one of you wants to respond to that.
It's probably best that I respond to that one. So you have to have the support of your church, first and foremost, because you're representing your church. So we have regular introductions to Anna Chaplaincy on Zoom that people can come to with somebody from their church, where we explain about Anna Chaplaincy. And then if the person still feels, yes, this is what I'm called to, and their church discerns that they are a person who would be right for that role, and then we provide the training, and then we work with the church or the organisation to set up an agreement between BRF Ministries and the organisation, so that we can allow them to use the logo and the name. It's a trademark agreement, so that we know who's calling themselves an Anna Chaplain. And then once you have an Anna Chaplain in your church or organisation, supported part of the ministry team, you can then start to invite others to join in and be part of that ministry, part of that chaplaincy as other Anna Chaplains or as Anna Friends. So you classically would have one Anna Chaplain and then several Anna Friends who help then to share the load of visiting and of running all groups if you have any, and being collaborators in the ministry. But the Anna Friends are also safely recruited within the parish context and known people who the church can endorse, but they're not taking on the leadership responsibility, and their time commitment is usually lighter. So they might, whereas the Anna Chaplain might be doing quite a few hours a week, even as a volunteer, the Anna Friend might only do a couple of hours a week. So it's a lighter commitment without the leadership responsibility, but as part of the team and with a different training.
Okay, Alison's just added another question, so which says, does that mean that Anna Chaplains are local rather than national ministries?
Absolutely, yes. It's very much, we are resourcing and supporting the establishment of Anna Chaplaincies, but they are the local church's Anna Chaplain. So if you move churches, you can't take your Anna Chaplaincy with you. You can hopefully re-establish it, but under the auspices of your new church.
Okay, thank you. Is it?
Can I just say, as an Anna Chaplain, that it's the most wonderful ministry, and that the support we get from head office, from Julia and her team, is incredible.
Thanks, Gay. That's really,
Thank you.
really helpful and affirming. Thank you. Okay, I just another question. Annie's asking, how can we find out where our local Anna Chaplain is? I mean, you're not in every place in the country at the moment, are you? But if someone was wanting to find out if there was somebody local, would they contact you, Julia?
Yeah, well, they would contact the generic Anna Chaplaincy email address, which is annachaplaincy@brf.org.uk. So there's a contact. You can go to the website, the Anna Chaplaincy website, and you'll see there you can make a contact through the website, or you can just email that generic email address, which I will put in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, if you Google Anna Chaplaincy, I was looking earlier on, and it's Catherine's put it in the website address, so that's really helpful. Something we were talking about when you were in your breakout groups, that those was on the screen, we're just talking about things like travel costs and that, because actually living in rural communities is expensive anyway. If you're volunteering in a rural community, that could actually be quite an expensive, if you're driving around visiting people, you have some kind of guidelines about that within the organisation, I think, don't you?
Yes, in as much as anyone in a lay ministry or voluntary role in a church would be encouraged to submit expense claims for mileage, we would establish that at the start, that's part of appointing your Anna Chaplain, that you meet their costs. As a church, if you haven't got the wherewithal to do that, then don't appoint an Anna Chaplain, because that's really not fair on a volunteer to feel that they have to be out of pocket. So yes, it's part and parcel of church ministry, isn't it, that your church meets the financial costs. But what the difficulty becomes is when the Anna Chaplain wants to forego that, because they see it as part of their giving to the church. But then you might have another Anna Chaplain who doesn't have the luxury of being able to fund their own expenses. So it needs to be an expectation that out-of-pocket costs will be met. One of the difficulties for older people's ministry is there's no money for it. You can get money if you're doing children and young people work. And the Church of England has a big national strategy to grow younger. So we're always kind of battling against that when we're trying to get funding for anything to do with older people. So churches, and rightly so, have young people's ministers and pastors, but they don't tend to fund older people's ministry. So we're always doing everything on a shoestring, with a lot of goodwill and generosity on the part of people who feel strongly about this. But we would love it that we could persuade the church organisations and funding bodies that this is equally valid, that it's just as important in God's economy as young people's ministry. They're both of absolute value, aren't they? So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, when actually we have an aging population, and so the numbers of older people are growing. That we need to, anyway, we all know that. Just a question I had. You mentioned about social prescribing, which is something that's becoming more common, and that I wondered if you were finding that links with, for example, doctors' surgeries and that in terms of them recognizing the value of what you're doing and then referring people to you. It'd be interesting just to hear a bit about that and about how that's working out.
Do either of you want to respond to that, Wendy or Paul? I can respond on behalf of the network, but have you any experience of that?
We've been approached by our hospice, which is a non-bed hospice. So it's a hospice that has rangers. So we've trained some of their people. They have a chaplaincy there, so they came in and trained us. The GPs would love to use us. They really would. And I get a number of social workers who use us extensively. I think the problem I've got is that we could so get overwhelmed by this. So there's no barriers at all between NHS or local provision coming in or social care coming in. Everybody wants to work with us, particularly in the church. And they recognise, particularly around bereavement, grief and loss, the expertise that we have. And the time that we can provide, but I have to be so careful. It's not just me, not that my congregations don't get overwhelmed with it, because we care passionately, but you know, we've got lives to live, and as you say, don't want to have more broken people because we've overwhelmed them.
Yeah.
We have a local doctor's surgery, which they tend to, they know about us, but they tend to refer to Linking Lives, and then Linking Lives sometimes refer to us. So that seems to be the way it goes. So, but we not in a situation of being overwhelmed with referrals from doctors. So it's different. It's different here. Perhaps if we went in more and put across what we do, there might be more referrals. But you know, like Paul said, you have to be very careful that you don't get to so many people that you haven't got the staff to do it. Yeah,
I think it's easier in more populated areas where the Anna Chaplains are providing group-based support, like dementia cafes and carers groups, because they can more easily absorb the referrals. But if it's always about one-to-one, then you're soon going to be swamped, aren't you? And just to say, Linking Lives is one of our good partner organisations nationally. Don't know if people know Linking Lives. It's active in different parts of the country, but it's a befriending scheme, church-run befriending projects, and that's what Wendy was referring to. So we're currently training them to have chaplaincy within their Linking Lives schemes, actually. But that's again an ecumenical initiative, doing a lot of work with older people, but the one-to-one befriending.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there was just a comment from Sarah, which I'll just read. Sarah says it's probably too late to say now, but if we have any thoughts about encouraging intergenerational support, older people giving as well as receiving, especially when so many have such rich faiths. I think we just kind of hold on to that. I think that's a really important comment. This isn't just something we do to people. It's about, you know, recognising the value that older people still have in our communities.
Yeah, can I just say, yes, intergenerational ministry is very much part and parcel of Anna Chaplaincy. It's something which we're really keen on, because we see how much older people have to give younger people. So absolutely, thank you, Sarah. It's a really important point to make.
You're quite interesting with BRF to do some. They may already do this some crossover with Messy Church and Anna Chaplaincy. But
funny you say that, but we do have Messy Vintage, so that's it. But Messy Church is intergenerational anyway. So
yeah, absolutely. Oh, somebody's put Messy Vintage is great. So that, yeah.
Thanks, Beverly.
Can I just say a really big thank you to Paul and to Wendy and to Julia. That's been really interesting, really helpful. I have to admit, I knew little about Anna Chaplaincy until fairly recently when we thought about looking on this webinar at doing something about spiritual work with older people. But it's great. It's really encouraging. It would be nice to see that developing more across the country. So thank you so much for each of you for your time and your energy and all that you do, and to all those who are on the call that are Anna Chaplains. It sounds amazing, and we're really encouraged to have you here. As we begin to draw together, I'm just going to hand over to James, who's going to finish off our webinar today. But a really big thank you to all of you for attending.
And thank you all. I've got the notices. So on the 16th of April, we have our next webinar for Positively Rural, and the subject is, and the title is on being involved and having confidence around being a Christian presence at rural festivals. So for the festival season coming up, it's about being a Christian presence at those rural festivals. So that's on the 16th of April, 1 o'clock till 2:30, and Catherine, who is on the call tonight, I've been told will have the Eventbrite ready and up and running in the next couple of days or so. So that's just the next one of our webinars information will be sent out to you. As we close, I was given the task of closing in prayer, and earlier on, Julia used the phrase that we are going to be a loving presence in the lives of people, almost in between, and almost a third space in between the structures of the church and the organisations. And so I wanted to close with a short reflection from John O'Donoghue, and this is titled For Presence. So awaken to the mystery of being here and enter the quiet immensity of your own presence. Have joy and peace in the temple of your senses. Receive encouragement when new frontiers beckon. Respond to the call of your gift and the courage to follow its path. Let the flame of anger free you from all falsity. May warmth of heart keep your presence aflame. May anxiety never linger about you. May your outer dignity mirror an inner dignity of soul. Take time to celebrate the quiet miracles that seek no attention. Be consoled in the secret symmetry of your soul. May you experience each day as a sacred gift woven around the heart of wonder. Amen.
Amen.